Women's Health Collective podcast. We are week 2 in April. This month, we are taking on our own testimonies and a new format for this month where we are each sharing our testimonials to you here on the podcast. And then behind the paywall in our membership group, we are talking about how we managed to bring prayer life into our life and what that looks like for us. So today I am the lucky chosen one who will get to share my testimonial and tell you a little bit about where I came from and how I got into a very prayerful life. So here we go. So I grew up going to church. I had a pretty volatile childhood. I had my mom and dad divorced when I was 5. And it just so happened that we had this church bus that was right across the street from our house. And so my mom got into bartending and she was using drugs, and it was pretty, I just never knew what it was going to be like in the house. And so on Sundays I got to escape. So I'd sneak into her room and steal change out of her purse, because every Sunday the church bus would take us to the little general store in the little neighborhood that I lived in, and I could buy candy and then eat the candy on the way to church. And so that was like my fun Sunday. And I probably was 6 years old when I started doing that. And I went to this church. It was a Southern Baptist church, and I loved it, and she supported it to the point where I would get to go to vacation Bible school in the summer. And we had other neighborhood people that went to the church, so she was familiar with it at least, but she never went with me. And as a little kid, I remember getting saved in Sunday school and having to learn John 3:16 and all of that fun stuff. Well, by the time I was 12, I had already started down a pretty dark path and was drinking alcoholically, and I'd still go to church on the weekends, but we had moved to another location and the church bus didn't run anymore. And so one of the man who he and his family bought the house that we had lived in would pick me up and take me to church. And I don't know, I hear the story in my head today, and I don't really know if this was the story at the time, but it's the way that I remembered it. And I quit going to church. Basically, the new pastor that came into the church apparently made some sort of a comment about it looking inappropriate, and people were talking badly about this man taking me to church because I was a young girl and he was a grown man. And so he stopped taking me to church, and I was very angry at God because this was my escape from my mom. And I was 14 at the time, and I didn't go back to church until much, much later in life. And the reason that I chose to go back to church was because I was desperate for some form of salvation. Having grown up in a Southern Baptist church, I was a lot of hell and condemnation and fire and brimstone, and I was terrified of going to hell. I remember when 1999 hit, I was working at American Honda Finance, and I was sitting in the supply room, and everybody was talking about Y2K, and I just burst into tears. And this lady came in there that worked in the place with me, and she was so sweet, and she was like, "Well, honey, what is wrong?" And I was like, "I just know I'm going to go to hell. The world is going to end in 2000, and I am going to go to hell." I'm not joking. I was terrified of going to hell, and I had this little girl, and I had a baby. And so fast forwarding, and I walking through a very destructive path in life and living an alcoholic life. And when I was 30, I got sober. And that was when I first started to really take a look at my past and really take a look at the damage and destruction I had done in my life. And then I was really afraid of God, really afraid of how I was ever going to get through this. And so I started working a 12-step program, and the woman that was sponsoring me at the time had an incredible relationship with God. Like, I'd never seen anything like it. She would pray for a parking spot in the grocery store and get it. Like, she just knew God was always there for her. And I'd never seen faith like that before. And so it really kind of opened my eyes to the possibility of this kind and loving God. And, 12-step programs will teach you that you get to choose your God. And so that's kind of how I had to go about doing that at the time, because again, I'd stepped away from God for many, many years at this point in my life, and been very almost agnostic, for lack of a better word. I never stopped believing that there was a higher power. I just was really hard for me to believe in God. And I'd started questioning the reality of Jesus and questioning the reality of the Bible. And, I was that person that preached, oh, it was written by man, it's 2,000 years old. And I bought into all of that. Kind of. I say kind of, because deep down, I always think I believed. I think I just really wanted friends, and that was the friendships that were available to me at the time, because I did not have a prayer life at all. But what did happen was I started journaling, and I remember I was 5 years sober, and I was so angry. I just wanted to drink again so badly. And I remember reading this book, and this woman in the book had people write a letter to a disease. So I talked to my sponsor and told her that I was going to write a letter to God. And I was hurting, and I was angry, and a lot of it was toward my mom. And so I wrote this letter to God. And Julie, when you shared your story, it made me think about this. I had put myself in so many positions in my youth, and I blamed my mom for so much. And so I write this letter to God one night, and I'm bawling my eyes out while I'm writing the letter. And then I go to bed, and the next day I get up and write a letter back to myself. And, I'm praying for God to speak through this pen, and he does. And I still have this letter today. And in that letter, he shares with me that we all have free will, and that it was my mom's choices that she got to make, but that he kept me safe for me to continue to, so it was just like this little answer, I guess, that I needed at the time to have a little bit more faith. And that's what happened to me all through my early sobriety, was these little nuggets were dropped for me to help me rebuild my faith and help me start believing in God. And this is where, and then I met my husband, and we wanted kids really badly. And I've had an abortion, and I had a hysterectomy, and we couldn't have children. And this was the one thing I could not forgive myself for. And my husband looked at me the day that I shared that information with him and said, no matter what happens, he is always there for me, and he loves me. That's when I saw the true forgiveness of Jesus. And that's when I realized that I truly had been forgiven. It's also when I became super pro-life. and my whole life changed in that moment. My whole life changed in that moment. And ever since then, and that was in, I think, 2017 or 18, ever since then, I've never questioned the love of God, and I have never questioned Jesus walked this earth, and I have never questioned that I can be forgiven, and that I get to have a purpose in life, and that I'm worthy. And it still can be really hard to be in my own head sometimes, but I have reminders, and I get to take action today. And so where prayer comes in is that I get to thank God every single day for that forgiveness. And, it makes me think of in the Bible when God talks about, or when Jesus is talking about the lady who is the sinner that comes in and, anoints him with oil and gets him ready for his death. And, the Pharisee can't understand why God would spend time with that woman, because she's such a sinner, and he would accept her. And God forgives her of her sins, or Jesus forgives her of her sins right then and there. And he says to her, or he says to that Pharisee, who do you think is going to be more grateful? The person who has sinned so much and been forgiven, or the person who has never, or the person who believes that they've been true their whole life, even when they haven't. And so it's not that I feel like my sins are so much worse, but that, I guess in some ways they kind of are, but I do feel like I lived this past that I'm reborn from. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. It's the biggest and most wonderful gift that I could ever receive in my life. And I knew I wasn't going to get through that story without bawling. So there you have it. Now I am like hot from head to toe, and my story is in the public. So, but there you have it. If you want to know more about how I go about living a prayerful life, you'll get to learn about that behind the prayer wall or the paywall. I am going to encourage you to get into our membership. And here is why, guys. The conversations that are happening in the membership group for the trainings around how God is working in our lives and how our prayer lives have changed us so much is unbelievable. You are completely missing out if you're not getting in on these trainings, because we're telling you our hearts and our testimonials here on the YouTube portion. But what's going on the training session is where the real cleansing is coming in, and so much scripture and so much just, I don't really know how to describe it. Ladies, do you have anything else that you can say to help me make this clear about how
real
trainings are?
And raw.
Yeah.
It's real and raw life.
Yeah.
Real.
Yeah. This is like, as we have evolved, we realized we've been together for almost a year now. As we have evolved into this membership group, we have gotten to know each other very well, and we are bringing so much more authenticity into these trainings with this new platform that we're using. So you're missing out. That's all I have to say. You're missing out. So I'm going to ask you, if you are not going to sign up for the membership, I'm going to ask you to please
like,
subscribe,
Share.
hit that notification bell so you get notified every time we release a new video. And please make sure you comment below what you would like for us to do trainings on, as well as leave reviews if you're listening on the podcast platforms. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
bye everyone.